we've been going for nearly an hour and a half. I believe now that we have one project goal. And when I say a goal, the direction we want to go in, not necessarily that we will get there, but the goal where we want to be is that all tech authors generate accessible outputs. That's a goal that the project could set out to achieve. And Jonathan G's remark, drag the mathematicians along, indicates that it's not only a technical problem, but a social problem. Mm-hmm. And by a tech author, I mean any author, one of whose outputs is tech-generated PDF. If one of the outputs is tech-generated PDF, then there's a tech file in there that should be a complete textual representation of everything. And so it ought to be possible, if that tech file conforms to the Unix philosophy of being a text file that conforms to a standard so it can be readily processed, one would expect that tech file to contain sufficient information to produce the accessible outputs. It may not be the right way to do it, but somewhere in the pipeline, there ought to be something we can tap, like tapping a phone line, that allows us to get out our accessible outputs. So that's the project goal, that all tech authors are generating accessible output. And I also have a project plan. Use R as the model to follow. R Markdown, R Markup, Bookdown, the community, the way things work. Try and follow that model inside the mathematical community. Clearly, adaptations have to be made because mathematicians have got their own favorite devices and culture and so forth. But how does that sound? Steve Jacobs gives it a thumbs up. Jonathan Jogfrey gives it a thumbs up. Nelson, Kelly? Nelson?
I've been busy taking notes here, so I'm a little behind. I think they're admirable goals. I'm not convinced yet, at least for the kinds of documents I produce, that Markdown might be a way to consider. I will think about looking into it in the future, but at the immediate point in my life, I'm over my head in projects and overextend it. So I'm not sure I have the time to do so at this point.
I think Jonathan G wants to come back on that. Jonathan?
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest you change to Markdown. I think it's the way that people who use Markdown are thinking and what they're doing in the end that is important. So one of the key things that happens for many Bookdown projects, and this is where it's an option, by the way, is that all of the source files that create the project are embedded in the project, and the end user ends up with all the source files. Now, that's not true for the vast majority of tech-generated PDFs. But if a tech-generated PDF could include at the bottom a hyperlink to the zip archive that contains all the files that are needed to recreate that same PDF, then the end user has automatically been given all the resource that they need to be able to pump through a pipeline to get an accessible version for themselves. That removes the effort required by the author, except for that one thing. Did I put the link? Did I click the button that says add the accessible content or add the source content to the bottom of my file? You know, one small little change for lots of authors could lead to huge empowerment for many many, many readers. And I'm pretty sure that we could do that right now. We do it with things like preprint archives where people upload their actual source file as well as their the readable version, so to speak.
I just wanted to say that I don't think that we necessarily need to get everybody to convert to Markdown, but I think if we bring some of the principles and, like Jonathan mentioned, the community aspect of it to tech, that I feel like is has a potential generational gap there, that it will be almost just as successful, because Markdown is based on tech. And so if we could make tech produce more accessible things easier without the users having to know what their, like, increase the amount of input that they have, which is basically what Bookdown and Markdown have done and allowed our users to be able to create, then you will get a bigger following just because it's available. So the short answer would be, I don't think we have to make everybody move to Markdown. I think we just need to bring some of the principles to tech.
That's right. We want something that is, I think biologists called homologous. It has the same shape, has the same function, but it doesn't have the same details. I'd like to say something related to R, which is it gets a lot of funding from all sorts of places. And I believe one of its funders is NumFocus, which I know fairly well because it funds Python stuff. And an alternative happy outcome for the project proposal is that we write a brilliant project proposal that the US government sadly declines, but that we get funding from NumFocus as an outcome. So I think what I'm interested in, and certainly to solve the tech problem, it has to be a technical thing, it has to be a social thing, and it also has to be a community thing. And if the US government can't fund those things, then we have to find self-funding or other solutions, or do the best we can. But R has succeeded somehow to develop its community and everything else like that. So maybe we don't need, maybe we can use the same funding model that R uses. That's a hypothesis.